I've wasted all my good jokes though, so it's gonna be real boring. Hi, yeah, so I'm Dylan, CEO and co-founder of Matter.io, and so we deal with consumers that are incredibly untechnically savvy, that tend to be more female, that tend to be older. That is exactly where we want to be, but I know that's not this audience. So thinking about what doesn't look like it's this audience. So in thinking about what I could do to make this presentation interesting and kind of what we've learned along the way, because our whole team is like you. We've hard here? Easier now? Cool. Yeah, so I'm thinking about some of the challenges that we've faced that you will inevitably face, especially if you're dealing with consumers. It's how to bring emerging technology, things that are totally sci-fi, things that we read about in Wired and that we're really excited about and are just beginning to maybe capture the imagination of mainstream consumers to market for consumers, because that's what we've always tried to do. So let me see if I can get this to work. Yeah, so just as a quick aside, we're a really young company. We're not successful yet. It seems like it would be much more useful to tell you what we've done wrong, because we've done a lot more of that than what we've done right. And when we think about what we're doing right and what's really working for us, it really very much comes from the early experiments that we've run. So I gave you that. Yeah, so like I said, Matter.io, we build applications for 3D printing. So to Max's point, 3D printing is awesome and amazing for people that can design 3D stuff. And most people can't design 3D stuff. And so we've been focused really from day one on what those applications look like. And our goal has always been to get your grandma to 3D print stuff. That is not my grandma, that's Betty White, but it's someone's grandma. So today our most active users, like I said, are over 30 and female. So we're not quite getting your grandma to 3D print, but hopefully your aunt, which is pretty awesome. And what's really cool, we just did a big thing for Valentine's Day and we followed up. Only half of our users know they're 3D printing, and less than a quarter of them know they're using 3D design tools, which is awesome. Which is surprising until you hear that we're actually making personalized jewelry. We make a wide range of personalized products and work with all kinds of designers, but jewelry is one of the places where we've really found product market fit. So how did 4 dudes who started college by building 3D printers in our dorms and in our labs become jewelry makers? We are not. I'm the most fashionable person on our team by like an order of magnitude. And like, this is what's going on. So how did we end up building jewelry? It wasn't our first insight. When we like imagined this company and how we were going to bring 3D printers to the mainstream and 3D printing to consumers, jewelry was like not top of mind. But the way that we got there and what we've discovered was pretty measured. And so how, I would say, if there's one lesson we've learned, it's to stop listening to what consumers say they want and start focusing really closely on what they're actually doing, what really captures their imagination. And so I find this meme on the internet to be particularly useful because there's one of these for everyone. I was on this and Google for like an hour today looking at these. There's very much a vision of people's selves that they see that's divorced from what they actually do. And that's particularly useful when it comes to looking at signals for early adoption. So when we think of technology and 3D printing in particular, I would say much more so than the Internet of Things and some of the other hardware technologies out there, is one that has really captured the imagination of people. But when it comes to what they actually do, what their behavior signals, there's a giant disconnect. It's actually, somebody just forwarded me an article in Forbes that 1 in 3 Americans are ready for a 3D printer in their home. How many people in this room have used a desktop 3D printer? How many of you believe that 1 out of 3 Americans, 300 plus million Americans, are ready for a 3D printer in their home?
Yeah.
So one person. It's a way of beating this point, right? So we're kind of on our third iteration. I spent the day with David Cohen, as the head of Techstars. We're in Techstars right now, and he said, we don't like to use pivots. We say companies punt. So a pivot is you change one thing about your business. A punt is you run around in circles until you figure out what you're doing. So we've gone through 3 punts, I would say. And our first punt started really before we were a company at all. It was me and my co-founder. We were actually living in Chile at the time, and we both built 3D printers in college. So I went to Cornell and worked on the Fab at Home project there. He was at MIT, and he worked at CBA with Neil and the big printers. I worked on the small printers, and together we shared this dream of bringing 3D printers to your grandma. And our first misstep, which should have been obvious in retrospect, was starting by solving our own problem. So we had like 18 half-built rep wraps between the two of us, and we thought, wouldn't it be awesome if we could send jobs to these 3D printers from wherever we were? So we were living in Santiago, our printers were like in Ithaca and Manhattan and Boston and Palo Alto. Wouldn't it be great if we could just plug a Raspberry Pi into the side of that and just print? Click print. There's all this awesome 3D content on the internet. We spend like all day in Blender and SolidWorks. Can't we just like churn this stuff out? Why doesn't wireless printing exist for 3D? And if we solve that problem, like, won't everybody jump in? Like, isn't all your grandma needs just like that print button? And she'll be able to make all her tea cozies and jewelry and teapots. And so we started with that. And we built a web-based interface that interacted with the Raspberry Pi. If Tesla was around, we would have used that, but it's about 1.5 years ago. And our initial target was the professional market. So we both worked at kind of design and consulting firms before. And so we figured, well, who does a lot of prototyping, who shares our problems? It's people that do a lot of rapid churn manufacturing. And if we can start with them, we can scale it from there. And so we had our little box with a Raspberry Pi in it. And we piloted it in, let's say, 12 or 24 design firms, universities. So we had a whole bunch at IDEO and a whole bunch at Frog Design and a bunch at MIT and a bunch at Harvard. We had this weird little network around Boston and California of these connected machines. And what we discovered really quickly was that our problem, which was wireless printing, was nobody else's problem. Like nobody. Maybe at Artisans Asylum. Not even at Artisans Asylum. Oh man.
We just take our laptop.
So for consumers, the problem, of course, was content creation. It's like didn't even scratch the surface. And for design professionals, they didn't want to deal with in-house printing at all. So it was great that these great design firms indulged us. But in about a week, every single one of our printers, we owned like 20 MakerBots looked like that. And I'd say 3 days in, almost everybody had abandoned them. So we started with our own problem, really without validating whether it was a problem for anybody else, either on the high end or the low end. So we took a step back. This is before we became a real startup, so this is just Dylan and Greg, basement, lots of rep wraps and broken MakerBots, hitting up our friends to make spaghetti. That did not come out of a 3-doodler, by the way. And we said, well, what is the problem? Is there kind of a known problem? And we talked to consumers, and it came down to this issue of content creation. And if you talk to anybody in the CAD space or in 3D printing, it's like content. How do you get consumers to make content? So we thought, all right, we're smart dudes. We've built software, consumer-facing software before. Our team, the team we put together anyway, had a background in 3D graphics, so worked at Apple on IAD and a whole bunch of other early web 3D technologies, built out a lot of the library for WebGL and constructed solid geometry and a lot of that stuff. We said, we are going to solve this problem. And we started talking to consumers, and we said, well, what's holding you back from creating stuff now? And everybody said the tools. They're too complicated, they're too expensive, they don't run on Mac. Come on, SolidWorks. So how do we make this simpler? Well, it's got to be free, it's got to be browser-based, and we started, I think we had a pretty smart approach to this. We started actually watching people using SolidWorks and even using some much simpler programs like Tinkercad, which some of you guys might be familiar with, and we said, well, what's actually tripping people up here? What are they doing that they can't get over? And we found all kinds of really weird and unexpected things. Like something that we found, and I would say 75% of the people that we watched in CAD is they actually just got lost in space. It's just a movie, but also what happened with CAD. So they'd be trying to push and combine two things together, and they thought they were touching, and we would have to say, hey, change the angle of you, see what happens, and they'd realize they're on totally opposite sides of the canvas. So what we did, we built gravity into our program, and in terms of creating complex geometries from scratch, and the things that people wanted weren't cylinders and spheres and pyramids or prisms. So how did we build that? Well, we thought, well, what if we had a really easy way of combining complex shapes, kind of mashing things together? That could be one way to get over it. You could take things off of Thingiverse. You could take a model of Reid Pettis' head and you can make it into an ornament, because all you need to do is plop an ornament down so you can have Reid hanging it from your tree. And in terms of the interface, what resonated with people? What do they actually use for content creation? And we said, well, photo editing. We talked to a bunch of people and they said, well, what if this was like Instagram? We were like, okay, we can do that. We know Instagram. We knew the guys from Aviary too, so we were like, oh, let's just knock that off. How do we do that? And I would say, so this product, Matter Remix, we released kind of as a modular CAD program for mesh editing, but a lot of people to combine shapes. And what we found is the first 3 days, it was actually like a giant hit. It solved a problem that consumers knew they had, especially early adopters, which was creating new content and complex things. But when we looked as to what people were actually doing, we saw like 10, this slide should be 100 times as big as it is. We saw like 1,000 versions of the Stanford Dragon with like a Lego cut out of its head. Or we had the Stanford Bunny with like jackalope ears coming out of it. And so we found people were having fun and experimenting, but they would abandon it really quick because they couldn't, and they weren't creating things that they cared about. They were having fun and they were experimenting, but fundamentally what it came down to is that they were engaging in a whole new kind of behavior that didn't quite fit into their lives. So when we started talking to people, well, why, what's up with this jackalope? Is this really what you wanted to make? And of course, no. There was antlers, and there was a rabbit, so we mashed them together. Was it fun? Yes. Would you come back again? Sure. No one came back again. So we went back to the drawing board and we said, all right, well, we figured out a lot of the interesting kind of UI challenges. How do we get people to actually make things together? But we still have this existential what or why. Why are people making things? Can we really introduce a new behavior? Is that the right way to go? And the big takeaway from that was we solved a real problem, but the real problem wasn't a real need. There weren't people that were sitting around saying, I just wish I could make this thing, but I don't have the tools. I just wish I could do this, but I don't have the right tools. And what we found is the people out there in the world that have that problem learned SolidWorks really fast. And they figured out ways to get keygens on BitTorrent, and they find the tools that they need. So we took a step back and we said, well, if we solved the problem but not the need, what is the need? And said another way, what are people doing right now that 3D printing is awesome for? And it was pretty simple for us. We took a look at social media where people are sharing, broadcasting the things that matter most to them, and they're buying lots of custom products and products that are unique to them, right? So we thought, well, 3D printing, manufacturing technology for custom goods, lots of personal information about people that they care about. People are broadcasting. The behavior of broadcasting things that you care about is there, closely connected to buying things that are unique to you. It's another kind of an analog form of broadcasting in a way. How do we bring those two things together? And that's kind of where we are today. So we launched essentially a new consumer marketplace called DYO. We launched it right before Valentine's Day. So we had a lot of Valentine's Day themed jewelry, but essentially it's using CAD and using 3D printing to deliver products that would otherwise be impossible to produce, especially at the cost that we can, and that people actually want. Note that people actually want and are willing to give us money for, which is pretty cool. And so kind of as we think about how this grows and where it goes, it has a lot less to do with 3D printing, and it has a lot less to do with emerging technology, and it's a lot more to do with giving people experiences that are meaningful to them and that they want. And so when we think about the world, our host of Razorfish said, everything digital will be physical. And for us, what that means is that everything that you care about, everything that you want to celebrate will become a physical object that you can buy, and that you can give, and that you can hold and keep. And that's what we're working on now. So lots to figure out, but in a sense, we've honed in on something that is really significant because people care. And they're not just willing to experiment, but they're willing to take out their credit card and they're willing to invest. And in a lot of cases, and we've only been doing this for about 3 months, we've had people come back. We have 25% return customers in the first 3 months. So we're excited about what we're doing now, and it's made possible by 3D printing. It's not about 3D printing, and I think that's really important. Thanks.